what we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Despite constitutional guarantees, American civil rights and liberties are constantly in danger of violation, whether by individuals, corporations, or government institutions. Regardless of whether personal prejudices or national security concerns lie at the root of these violations, challenging them and holding wrongdoers accountable is imperative for the sake of the constitutional integrity and the preservation of the American way. Trial lawyers advocate for awareness, the truth, and a person's right to know. They believe that in the absence of the truth, all of us stand helpless to defend ourselves, our families, our health, and our way of life. Oftentimes, we don't think about or worry about or understand what is happening to another until it happens to us. Deceits have no boundaries. Disease doesn't recognize the color of our skin or our political party's affiliation. When it comes to cover-ups and false allegations by agencies of the state and the federal government, there is not a soul amongst us who does not have a cringing fear of their overwhelming, awesome power. It is at these times that we need experienced and dedicated trial lawyers, the warriors in the courtroom, who are willing to battle for us tooth and nail in the halls of justice to protect our cherished way of life. When a person with disabilities, or anyone else for that matter, calls the police seeking assistance, they expect to receive help. Sadly, people with disabilities and their family members or friends do not always receive the help they expect. In fact, they may receive something that is quite the opposite. People who experience forms of developmental or mental disabilities are oftentimes doubly targeted by police violence due to high rates of poverty and homelessness. The brutal murder of a homeless man with schizophrenia in Fullerton, California, presents what happens when homelessness, mental illness, and police brutality meet. Kelly Thomas was sleeping on the streets when he was murdered. He was approached by 6 police officers in July of 2011. When Kelly allegedly refused to comply with his arrest, 2 police officers held him down, while 4 more police officers took turns beating him with their batons and stunning him with tasers for 8 minutes. The beating left Kelly comatose and disfigured. He died less than a week afterwards. This was what Kelly Thomas looked like just before he died. To be plain, very little information is collected on a national level concerning police injuring and killing of people with disabilities. The problem comes from a larger failure to gather information on a national basis about police injuring and killing civilians as a whole. Police departments either do not collect or are reluctant to collect this kind of information. Reports of police injuring and killing civilians are scattered and imprecise. All across this great nation of ours, we see horrific examples of some cops beating and mistreating persons with developmental or mental disabilities because the cops are not properly trained. More training and better awareness of the complexities of interacting with people with disabilities will help decrease and maybe eliminate these unspeakable crimes against society's less fortunate. In Maryland, Ethan Saylor died because police responded with rapid and unnecessary force to his disability. In San Diego, 21-year-old Antonio Martinez, who has Down syndrome, was walking to his parents' bakery around 8 p.m. when he was stopped, pepper sprayed, and beaten by a San Diego sheriff's deputy. In Los Angeles, an LA County sheriff's deputy was caught on a cell phone camera throwing a punch in a girl's face. What makes it more outrageous is that it is obvious he hit a person with special needs that was struggling to break loose from the grip of the cop and a female deputy as they were trying to make her get off the bus. In Dayton, Ohio, a mentally disabled teen was harassed and abused by a police officer. In Washington, D.C., police assaulted a homeless man in a wheelchair. In Idaho, police arrested and handcuffed an 8-year-old autistic girl. In Hillsborough County, Florida, police were caught by their own surveillance cameras dumping a quadriplegic man from his wheelchair onto the ground. Apparently, they were trying to determine whether or not he actually needed the chair. These are just a few of the hundreds of daily examples improperly trained police officers perpetrate on those less fortunate than us. In this insider-exclusive Justice in America Network TV special, our news team goes behind the headlines in Oakland, California, with Dewitt, Lacy, and Ayana Curry, partners at Burris, Nisenbaum, Curry, and Lacy, to cover another horrific story perpetrated against a mentally disabled American in Justice in America, Justin Perkins' story. As Dewitt and Ayana have often said, the problem of police brutality is much more widespread than most Americans are willing to admit. Our nation practices a selective blindness in this great and strong nation. We have all become unwitting accomplices to the continuation of the conflict. Dewitt and Ayana have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best civil rights trial lawyers in California and across the nation. They have seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims of police brutality. They understand that police brutality is one of the most serious and enduring and divisive human rights violations in the United States. The problem is not just in California, but nationwide, and its nature is institutionalized. And because of that, they are driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. They learned a long time ago that if a person hasn't discovered something he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Their goals, not only to get justice for their clients, but to make sure all Americans have the right to a fair trial, honest cops, impartial prosecutors, and fair judges with no agenda. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful, and whatever is powerful may be just. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Oakland, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dewitt, Lacy, and Ayana Curry. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm.
We're Burris, Nisenbaum, Curry, and Lacy. John Burris took on 3 partners to cement and continue his legacy of civil rights litigation in the Bay Area. We have 2 offices, one here in Oakland and also in Beverly Hills, Southern California, and we do cases primarily in the state of California, but we are also national with our cases.
And primarily civil rights cases.
Primarily civil rights, primarily police misconduct, but we also do employment discrimination.
And there's no end to police misconduct, unfortunately, right?
Unfortunately.
You probably have a lot of people that call you up and say, policeman beat me up, did this, did that. You really have to investigate whether you got a case there, don't you?
Absolutely. I think one of the main jobs that we have as litigators is really to kind of investigate. Of course, you want to trust but verify, the old Reagan saying, right? Trust but verify what folks are saying. And because people's perceptions can be, misconstrued or whatever in the heat of the moment. And you want to make sure that what's saying is accurate. So, yeah, we definitely do have to investigate.
We're here today on a case of Justin Perkins. And this is not only a police misconduct case, but it's dealing also with a disabled person, right?
Yes.
Tell our audience a little bit about the facts. What happened, and who was Justin Perkins?
Justin was, for many reasons, for many ways, I guess you could say, an average guy. He had an extended family that he was pretty close with. They had, Sunday dinners. He had a mental deficiency, for sure. The family would say that he probably acted more about like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, but he was an adult.
How old was he, by the way?
He was in his 30s.
This was in Anaheim, California, right?
Anaheim, California. And he was visiting his father, who was ill at the time. And he went religiously and weekly to go see his dad and spend time with him in his last days. He had a fear of being stopped or being confronted by the police. And I think this was largely due to what had happened in Anaheim with another case called Kelly Thomas, in which some Anaheim officers had killed Mr. Thomas, who also suffered from some mental health conditions or who struggled with them. And he felt that he was next. Unfortunately, all of that came true. The very next day he was to encounter police. They were inquiring about some type of misdemeanor, whether or not he had shoved or hit somebody's hat. And it turned into a knockdown, drag out in front of his front door, in which he ends up being restrained and had a carotid restraint applied to him for about a minute.
Chokehold.
A chokehold, yeah. He was tasered a few times. He was beaten very viciously. And the pictures and videos afterwards demonstrate that and show that. And he died from that.
So when you were contacted about this case, walk us through what you did first?
The first thing we did was to go meet with the family, it's a very close family, and they were at the hospital because their loved one, for some of them it was their brother, for others it was, for Miss Perkins, it was her son, had been taken there, and they weren't given any information. Nobody told them, was he alive, what was going to happen to him, until some nurses told them that he was dead when he got here.
Right. When you tried the case, you brought those nurses up?
We definitely tried to talk to them, but we couldn't figure out which one had attributed this statement.
Yeah. Obviously, you interviewed the officers.
Yes.
He was, as I'm reading right here, he was on his side in the recovery position. They kept pushing his head down between his legs, right? And they continued asking him questions which he was unable to respond. Aren't these officers trained to see what the condition of the people that they're trying to restrain?
But it's a great question. A lot of times I think people think the solution to these issues of misconduct or malfeasance are due to a lack of training.
But they get the training.
They're trained very well.
They just don't use it.
Well, or they choose not to use it, or there's a culture in the department, wouldn't you say, Ayana? About the level of force that they can use and get away with.
Yep, we'll be in deposition with the officers, ask them about their training. They can recite exactly what they were supposed to do. Then you ask them, well, why didn't you do that here? Did you do that here? No. Well, why didn't you? Well, because we don't have to.
It's kind of interesting. We're from Los Angeles, and on the police cars it says we're here to serve and protect, right? And that requires that you have empathy for everybody you encounter. But instead of making up excuses about why you weren't paying attention to the condition of the person you're with, right, or dealing with, they go to these extremes, end up killing people, right? And they have no remorse.
There's a interesting detail about Justin's case. There, that initial tasing, beating, and carotid chokehold was perpetrated by two officers who also got injured, and during that melee. Then he was handed off, Justin was, to two additional officers, backup officers who showed up. And those officers are the ones that actually kept, did not put Justin in the proper recovery position. He was completely non-responsive to those officers. They had him in a prone restraint. He was handcuffed face down, and they kept pushing on his back. And they say, well, he was fighting against us. And but if you look at the video, a jury could well determine he looks like he's bucking for air. At some point, he had turned blue. So, what was always an underlying issue in this case for me was that treatment of that second round of officers. The callousness was, their brethren had been injured in this first part of the incident, perhaps. It was always a question for me, but you're supposed to come to the situation anew, and they are trained to immediately put him in a recovery position, allow him to breathe. They never did, and that is that is what he expired from.
I'm sure the communication was made between the first pair of officers and the second that he attacked us, okay? Treat him like, that, right? There's a case, I think that was just decided last week, where an inmate beat up an officer, I think threw a spear at the officer, and they took him later on and beat, the bejesus out of him, right? And he died. Okay, and that's obviously illegal, wrong, and that sort of thing. And that's why I keep getting back to this issue of training. They know what they should do and should not do, and yet, when they're emotionally involved, they violate their own policy. Now, were these officers prosecuted criminally?
No, not at all.
When you do a case like this, do you send it with all the evidence to the district attorney to prosecute, to look at?
Sometimes.
Like Kelly Thomas. Those officers were prosecuted. They were acquitted. Unbelievably.
Yeah. For whatever reason, the district attorney in Orange County decided not to press charges against these officers. Mm-hmm. There was definitely a public resentment and cry out for justice when Justin was killed, but they exonerated the officers and said that they had acted appropriately.
Yeah, I understand that on some police departments there are specially trained police officers that deal with disabled people, right? They're called on the scene. Right. No one was called on the scene here, right?
No, but some of these officers actually did have training to deal with folks who may have been suffering from some mental deficiencies. The truth is, even in the basic academy, officers are trained how to deal with people who might be suffering from some type of mental disorder or mental deficiency.
How are they trained?
Well, they are given circumstantial, I guess, and experiential learning, right? If this happens, then these are some of the things you should be thinking about. Mm-hmm. When you're talking to somebody who is has a mental disorder or maybe drunk or intoxicated, you want to bring it down. You want to, create some rapport, not threaten with arrest, not get physical immediately, try to establish some type of relationship with the person and de-escalate.
Slow down the encounter, right. Take your time.
Now, this case went up on appeal, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where you come in the picture.
Yes.
Tell our audience, I know you're going to say qualified immunity was a major legal. What does that mean, qualified immunity?
So qualified immunity is whether an officer has acted unreasonably, it's a two-part inquiry. The basic question of were his actions unreasonable? And whether or not he's entitled to qualified immunity, that basically an officer can escape liability even if his actions were unreasonable. If a court determines that under these circumstances, your regular reasonable officer wouldn't know to use force under these circumstances.
Right, so the defense of the police department would be he was just doing his job.
He was just doing his job, and no officer would know not to use this type of force under these circumstances.
Right. Now you have a jury determining this, right? Well, this went on appeal, went to the justices. This was a Ninth Circuit case, right?
They agreed with us that holding Justin prone while handcuffed, and asphyxiating him to death, putting somebody in that position can be a deadly use of force. That's number one, the quantum of force. And two, that it was unreasonable under these circumstances because he was not resisting or putting up he didn't pose any real threat to these officers.
Right. Do you know if, when these cases, when you win these cases, do you know that if police departments, the ones that were like Anaheim Police Department, do you know if they pull all of the officers in and say, hey, look, we gotta watch this. We can't do this anymore. You have to follow your training, but you have to go overboard on this. Do you know if they do that?
We don't know, and it's remarkable because this situation with Justin happened in Anaheim, and the main case in the Ninth Circuit.
Kelly Thomas.
On the heels of Kelly Thomas, but there's also this case called Drummond. This was back even years before Kelly Thomas, established this notion that you can kill somebody by just simply having them handcuffed and pushing down on them while they're on the ground. That's a deadly use of force. Drummond established that, and that was out of Anaheim. And that was one of my points to the Ninth Circuit. I could accept that perhaps that we didn't know any better from any other agency other than out of Anaheim.
We definitely see some of these officers again and over again. And what may even be more interesting is we'll see the same officer at a different police department years down the line, in case they had multiple complaints or multiple suits against them at Vallejo. Then we'll see them in Fairfield or over in Hayward. So there is a switch off.
So in these cases, when you win, does any police department ever invite you in and give a kind of a speech about how you should?
We have actually had police departments reach out to us, especially, honestly, in this line of work with the cases involving the mentally ill. We've had some really significant victories changing the law in the country, really. And we have had agencies, Portland and other agencies across the country call us and say, I'm familiar with your case. Would you come here and tell us how to do it then? Or talk to us about this case. So yes, actually, yes. Far and few between, but there have been a few.
I'm just kind of surprised about one thing. When you watch movies, when internal affairs gets involved with the police department, nobody likes these guys, right? But do internal affairs department really investigate a lot of these cases? And what do they do with the investigation?
That's a fair question. And, I think certainly there are efforts that are made at investigating these occurrences, if they're even reported. I think the vast amount of these type of bullying and or brutish behavior probably go unreported.
Yeah.
But the ones that do, I think internal affairs may try. The question is, how do you police the police from within? Mm-hmm. And you're asking this person who has coffee with Joe every Friday or Saturday to now get Joe in trouble, maybe cost Joe his job and his livelihood. He's not going to do that. That's the compromise that happens. And there's a cognitive dissonance in America about that we can allow the police to police themselves like that.
What advice do you give anyone out there watching this show if they think they have been treated unfairly by the police, excessive force? What advice do you have to give them? We
have to engage in investigation, right? And we're great attorneys. I'm going to pat ourselves on the back here. We do good work, and our record stands for and shows that. But I think even before you get to call us, you got to understand that it's important that you stand up for yourself and that you don't have to accept being bullied by the police or by anybody. Mm-hmm. Not here in America. That's what the Constitution is for. It says you have the right to get legal recourse. And you should call somebody. You should call a civil rights attorney, a competent one that knows civil rights. You can call us. We're pretty good.
Always film the police.
So let's talk about that. Let's be real. In America today, there are certain parts of this country, even here, where an immigrant, a person of brown color, black, whatever, right, gets stopped by the police. What advice do you give them in case the person who's stopping them is racist, is prejudiced against certain types of ethnicities? What advice do you give them?
Live to see another day.
Yeah, I'll tell you some advice that I've heard John Burris give, and I give it to clients. And it says it's better. You don't want to be dead right. Right. Understand that you have rights, but those are to be vindicated in the court. And you probably are not going to do well with trying to fight these folks out in the streets. They have guns, they're armed, and they will hurt you and sometimes kill you. So best to live to fight another day. And talk to a lawyer afterwards. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. It's terrible that you have to take a beating sometimes, but better that than being killed.
Are you allowed, if you get stopped, are you allowed to film what's going on between you and the officer?
100%.
What if they say, give me your phone?
That's also a violation. That's a First Amendment.
But they do that. You know that.
They do. And you could say, I don't have to.
Live to fight another day.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to thank both of you and congratulations on the case. Keep up the good work.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.